My best friend set me up the night before my wedding, tricking me into a cartel hellhole south of the border. I spent my days and nights enduring torture while he moved into my house and slept with my fiancée back in the States. 7 years in that living hell turned me into a monster, more ghost than man. Everyone thought I was dead, buried in some unmarked grave. Especially him. Tonight, I'm standing outside his company's annual gala, dressed to the nines in a tailored suit. Under my left sleeve, a string of numbers is tattooed into my skin. The body tag numbers of the men who died in front of me. Long time no see, brother. 01 tonight's wind had a bone-deep chill. I stood outside the entrance to the Nexus Innovations annual gala, a world of shimmering gowns and clinking glasses, a universe of glittering success. My custom-tailored black suit was a piece of armor, its fine fabric and sharp cut hiding the gaunt, wired frame beneath. It was a shell, sealing away the jagged, sprawling scars and the sunless past they represented. I didn't belong here. I was a ghost crawled out of a mass grave, a spectator at a carnival for the living. My gaze was a poison-tipped blade, slowly sweeping over every guest who entered. A black Maybach glided to a stop at the end of the red carpet. The door opened, and a man emerged into a sea of camera flashes and sycophantic praise. It was him, Marcus Thorne. 7 years. Time had been exceptionally kind to him. He looked more polished, more radiant than ever, carrying himself with the effortless confidence of a man who owned the world. On his arm was a woman in a lavish evening gown, her smile bright and intoxicating. Sophia Wallace, my former fiancée. Her laughter cut through the din, a precise stiletto to my eardrum. On the face I once thought I'd look at for the rest of my life. There was no trace of nostalgia for the past, only the pure, unadulterated enjoyment of her lavish present. An invisible hand clenched around my heart, and the familiar, soul-tearing pain ripped through me again. Beneath my shirt and suit jacket, the string of numbers on my left arm, carved into my flesh with the most primitive, brutal methods, began to burn. Each digit was a life that had been extinguished. Marcus wrapped his arm around Sophia's waist, ready to make his triumphant entrance. His eyes scanned the crowd idly, and then they met mine. His smile froze solid. The moment his eyes registered my face, his pupils constricted into pinpricks. The healthy color drained from his well-maintained features, replaced by the ghastly pallor of a man who had just seen a ghost. The muscles at the corner of my mouth twitched, pulling into a smirk utterly devoid of warmth. I started walking toward him. 1 step, 2. My leather shoes clicked against the polished marble floor, a crisp, rhythmic sound that seemed to sync with the frantic hammering in his chest. I finally stopped in front of him, close enough to see the beads of cold sweat forming on his temples. Long time no see, brother. My voice was low and gravelly, as if it had been tempered for 7 years in the fires of hell. Every word carried an arctic chill. Marcus's body trembled uncontrollably. He instinctively took half a step back, pulling Sophia behind him in a stiff, protective gesture. Sophia stared at me. Her beautiful eyes filled first with confusion, then with shock, and finally with the same terror that twisted her companion's face. My gaze drifted over her panicked expression, a flicker of almost imperceptible mockery in their depths, before landing back on Marcus, pinning him in place like a pair of nails. Ethan, someone in the crowd whispered, their voice laced with disbelief. I ignored it. I raised my hand, slowly, deliberately, and clapped Marcus on his rigid shoulder. He flinched violently. The gesture was light, but my stare was that of a king cobra, coiling around his soul, injecting its deadliest venom. With that, I dropped my hand, turned my back on him, and melted into the deep shadows of the night. Behind me, I left Marcus's ragged, terrified breathing, Sophia's bewildered and frightened eyes, and a dead, unnerving silence that had fallen over the entire entrance. The overture to my revenge had just begun, and I was the sole conductor. Inside the gala, the crystal chandeliers cast a blinding, brilliant light, and elegant music drifted through the air. But Marcus's mind was in chaos. He clutched his champagne flute, his knuckles white. Several times, important business partners tried to speak with him, but his mind was elsewhere, His response is a beat too slow. Mr. Thorne? Marcus. The voice finally pulled him back. My apologies, Mr. Davis. I was just thinking about a company matter. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace and raised his glass. He kept telling himself he'd seen things. It had to be a mistake. Ethan Hayes died 7 years ago, somewhere south of the border. No body, no trace. How could he possibly be back? But those eyes that stared at him from the depths of a hell he couldn't imagine. And those words, my brother, replayed in his mind like a recurring nightmare. He had no idea that from the shadows, just beyond the reach of the opulent lights, I was watching him. I sat in a nondescript panel van, a live feed of the gala security cameras displayed on a tablet resting on my lap. In another window, the candlestick chart of a small-cap tech stock was plummeting. It belonged to a company that was a key part of one of Nexus Innovation's recent investment projects. I tapped the screen a few times, and a massive sell order was executed. Almost simultaneously, Marcus's phone began vibrating violently in his pocket. He found a secluded corner to take the call, and his face instantly turned ashen. Mr. Thorne, it's a disaster. Blue Ocean Microchips, the company we invested in. Someone's shorting it hard. The stock just flash crashed in the last few minutes. We're trapped. The losses are catastrophic. His assistant's panicked voice screamed through the receiver. What did you say? Marcus hissed, his voice a furious whisper. He hung up, the last of his composure shattering. He had a gut-wrenching feeling. This was no coincidence. It had to be connected to Ethan's appearance. His eyes turned cold and vicious. A flicker of murderous intent crossed his face. If he could make Ethan disappear 7 years ago, he could do it again. In the van, my phone buzzed with a text from Rick. Done, boss. The son of a bitch just lost at least 8 figures. A faint smile touched my lips. Good. The cornered animal was now on high alert. I wasn't in a hurry. This was just the first step, planting a seed of fear. I needed him to know I was back. Then I would let him wait sleeplessly for my next move. Later that night, I returned to a rundown walk-up in the Bronx, a room that cost me $800 a month. The place was bare, except for the wall, which was covered from floor to ceiling with a spider's web of information. Photos of Marcus, his daily schedules, the corporate structure of his company, financial data analysis, a meticulous map of his life. I took off the suit jacket, revealing a torso covered in scars. In the dim light, the black numbers on my left forearm looked particularly menacing. 1107-0923-0514. I pulled out my phone and played an encrypted audio file. Ethan, man, a buddy of mine has his project down in Mexico. The pay is insane. I know you're about to get married, probably tight on cash, right? Go down there for 2 months, you'll make what you make in a year here. It's a sure thing. You're my brother, would I ever lie to you? It was Marcus's voice, sickeningly sincere. I had listened to this recording thousands of times during my nights in the compound. Each time, the memories flooded back. The small, stinking cell, the dried blood on the walls, the air thick with despair. The crackle of a cattle prod, the searing pain as it hit my skin. The silence after a cellmate was dragged out, never to return. The screams day and night, like a dull knife sawing at my nerves. My fists clenched, my nails digging into my palms until the pain pulled me back from the abyss of memory. I forced myself to be calm. Hate was the fuel, but cold calculation was the weapon. I pulled an iron box from under my bed. Inside was a map drawn with codes and symbols and a worn-out address book. These were the things I had bought with my life in that hellhole. I called Rick Stone. Change of plans. We're accelerating, I said, my voice short and cold. Rick's voice came back, thick with a barely suppressed excitement. Ethan, I knew you were alive, man. These bastards. I've been waiting for this. Just tell me what's next. Rick, my only real friend from the compound. A small-time street hustler who got tricked into the same mess. He'd escaped 6 months before I did. He was my eyes and ears, the first and most trusted ally in my plan for revenge. Miles away, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, Marcus Thorne stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, downing glass after glass of red wine. He stared at his reflection, searching for something. He kept replaying the sight of those eyes, so familiar yet terrifyingly alien. He forced himself to remember that night 7 years ago, the night of the bachelor party. He'd gotten Ethan drunk, then watched as the men he'd hired cornered him, saw him struggle, and then shoved him violently into an unmarked van. He thought that was the end. He assumed Ethan would either die on the journey or perish in that godforsaken place. How could he have come back? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Marcus drained the last of his wine and hurled the glass against the floor. The sharp sound of shattering crystal echoed in the cavernous living room, breaking the last of his denial. Man or ghost, he had to strike first. 03 the next morning, Sophia woke up with a splitting headache. The image of the man from last night haunted her thoughts. She walked into the dining room, uneasy. Marcus was already dressed, watching the financial news on a massive screen, his face a dark storm cloud. "Marcus, last night, I think I saw Ethan," Sophia said hesitantly, her voice filled with uncertainty. Marcus's hand tightened on the remote, and the news channel abruptly changed. He looked up, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sophia, honey, you had too much to drink. How is that possible? Ethan died 7 years ago. Some accident south of the border. The police closed the case. You must have seen someone who looks like him. It happens." His explanation was seamless, but his shifting eyes and the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Maybe," Sophia said, only half convinced. She couldn't shake the feeling. Those eyes, the way they looked at her with that cold, mocking glint, it was him. She found her mind drifting back 7 years. Ethan had disappeared the night before their wedding. At the time, Marcus told her Ethan had gotten in deep with a foreign gambling syndicate and fled the country to escape massive debts. She had cried, she had raged, and eventually, under Marcus's constant, gentle care and support, she had slowly accepted it as fact. But looking back now, so many details seemed off. Why would a man on the verge of getting married, with a promising career, suddenly run off to gamble his life away? My eyes were watching them through a micro camera hidden in a smoke detector in their penthouse. Sophia's doubt was part of the plan. Marcus's lies were a fractured shell. All it needed was a gentle tap to shatter completely. I was the one who would provide that tap. I sent a text to Rick. A short while later, as Sophia was at her desk at the art gallery she managed, an anonymous email appeared in her private inbox. No subject, no body, just a single video attachment. On a strange impulse, she opened it. The video was grainy and shaky, filmed from a distance. But she immediately recognized the two men in it, Ethan and Marcus. It was from 7 years ago, at a coffee shop near her old office, just before Ethan vanished. There was no sound, but she could see Marcus talking animatedly to Ethan, wearing that familiar, charming smile. Ethan was looking down at a document, a hesitant expression on his face. The clip was short, ending abruptly. A violent shudder went through Sophia. A cold dread crept up her spine. Marcus had said Ethan just ran off. Why had he met with him right before he disappeared? And why had Marcus never, ever mentioned this meeting? She closed the video, her hands ice cold. A terrible thought began to grow in her mind. She started to dig, quietly, using her own resources to look into the official story of Ethan's death. Meanwhile, Marcus was in a tailspin. His company's stock was still in free fall. The entity behind the short selling was a ghost. Every lead he chased, every connection he called on, led to a dead end. He felt an invisible hand pushing him toward an abyss. He grew irritable and paranoid. At home, the tender affection was gone, replaced by a short temper. "Can you stop looking like you're at a funeral? I've got enough problems at the office without coming home to this," he'd snap. He started drinking heavily, muttering curses at the empty air when he was drunk. Looking at this stranger before her, Sophia's doubts solidified into a terrifying certainty. She began to question every word he had ever said, to doubt the entire foundation of their life together. The crack between them, which I had so carefully created, was widening into a chasm. I stood at the window of my cheap apartment, looking out at the city lights. In the darkness, the tattoo on my left arm felt like a living thing cold against my skin. "Marcus, your good life is just getting started." I picked up my phone and sent Rick his new instructions. "The next target is your core business. I'm going to make you feel what it's like to watch everything you cherish get stripped away, piece by piece." 04 the storm hit harder and faster than Marcus could have ever imagined. While Nexus Innovations stock was still bleeding, a bigger bomb detonated. A deep-dive investigative report appeared on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Nexus Innovations linked 2 offshore accounts and illegal transactions. Billions in untraceable funds. The article meticulously detailed how Marcus's company had funneled massive amounts of capital through a complex web of shell corporations. The money trail was clear, leading directly to a notorious cartel-run scam operation in Central America. The story was a depth charge dropped into a calm lake, and the resulting waves were tidal. Within hours of the article's publication, several major banks that partnered with Nexus Innovations announced they were severing ties and calling in their loans. The company's cash flow vanished overnight. A blizzard of negative press followed. The stock didn't just fall. It fell off a cliff, becoming virtually worthless. Marcus was in a full-blown panic. He was on the phone constantly, calling in every favor, leveraging every connection he had built over 7 years. But the so-called friends who had once slapped his back and laughed at his jokes were now either not answering his calls or giving him vague, evasive excuses. He discovered, to his horror, that every avenue of escape, every potential lifeline, had been severed just before he reached for it. I sat in a quiet coffee shop, the screen of my tablet glowing with live updates from financial news sites. The name Nexus Innovations, colored a sickening shade of red, was impossible to miss. I calmly lifted my cup and took a sip. The bitter liquid slid down my throat, pulling me back into a memory 1,000,000 times more bitter than the coffee. The compound, the training center. It wasn't a training center. It was a human slaughterhouse. On my first day, I saw a young man, barely out of his teens, beaten to death with steel pipes for refusing to cooperate. His warm blood splattered on the filthy walls. His body was dragged away like a sack of garbage, and a man with a ledger simply crossed off his name and called out a number. 1107. Get rid of it. That number is now etched on my left arm. A permanent tombstone that only I can read. My muscles spasmed with the ghost memory of a cattle prod pressed to my lower back. I heard the blood-curdling screams of a man in the next cell, a sound that made me bite my lip until it bled, helpless and filled with rage. I survived not because I was stronger, but because I was more useful. They found out I understood finance and coding, so they put me to work on more sophisticated scams. I played along, feigning compliance, making them enormous profits while buying myself another day, another breath. But inside, my soul had been burned to a cinder, leaving only the white-hot flame of vengeance. I channeled all my hate, all my humiliation, into learning. I memorized their methods, mapped their networks, and even managed to turn a few of their low-level guards into my own informants. My phone vibrated, pulling me from the past. It was a signal from Rick. The next phase was complete. As per my instructions, he had sent an anonymous package to every member of the Nexus Innovations Board of Directors. Inside was a secret ledger detailing all the corporate funds Marcus had embezzled for his personal use over the years. Across town, Marcus had just finished another fruitless phone call when his assistant informed him of an emergency board meeting. He walked into the conference room and was met with the cold, furious stares of his partners and the damning ledger thrown onto the table in front of him. "Marcus, you want to explain this?" Faced with undeniable proof, he couldn't form a single word, sweat pouring down his face. His own company had turned on him, but I wasn't done. I wanted total annihilation. Using a backdoor I had planned long ago, I remotely uploaded an audio file to Sophia's phone, a recording from 7 years ago of a call between Marcus and a human trafficker. I set it to play automatically at a specific time. That night, Sophia sat alone in the vast, empty living room of the penthouse, her mind reeling from the news reports about Marcus's crimes. Suddenly, her phone lit up and began to play the recording. "Is it done? Is he on his way?" It was Marcus's voice. "Don't you worry, Mr. Thorne. He's on a boat. I guarantee he's never coming back. But still, this is your best friend." "You sure you can do this?" replied a gruff, unfamiliar voice. "Just do your job. He's not my friend. Everything he had should have been mine, including Sophia. You'll get the rest of your money when it's done. Just make sure he disappears. Completely." Marcus's voice was cold, venomous, dripping with greed and jealousy. The recording was short, but every word was a hot, iron searing Sophia's heart. Ethan, south of the border, disappears. It all clicked into place. She finally understood. What happened 7 years ago wasn't an accident. It was a vicious, calculated plot orchestrated by the man she shared her bed with, against the man she was supposed to marry. Her entire world collapsed in that single moment. She covered her mouth to stifle a sob, but tears streamed down her face, a silent, heartbroken cascade. 05 Sophia ran out of the penthouse as if the devil himself was at her heels, driving recklessly toward the Nexus Innovations headquarters. All sense of decorum was gone. There was only one thought in her mind: to confront the monster who had deceived her for 7 years. She burst into the lobby, ignored the security guard, and kicked open the door to the CEO's office. Marcus was slumped behind his desk, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a caged animal. He jolted in surprise as Sophia stormed in. "Sophia, what are you doing here? Things are a mess right now." Before he could finish, Sophia threw her phone onto his desk. The recording was playing on a loop. "Marcus, you tell me, did you do this? Was Ethan's disappearance your idea? What have you been hiding from me for 7 years?" Her voice was shrill with anguish, each word a tear-soaked accusation. When Marcus heard the recording, the last bit of color drained from his face. He knew it was over. He lunged for the phone, but Sophia was faster, clutching it to her chest. "Sophia, let me explain. It's not what you think. It's a fake." He stammered, grasping at straws. "A fake? Then who was that man at the gala? Was that Ethan? He's back, isn't he? He's back to get his revenge on you." With that, Marcus's defenses crumbled. He dropped to his knees with a thud, grabbing Sophia's legs, his face streaked with tears. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was out of my mind. I loved you so much. I was so jealous of Ethan, jealous of everything he had. I couldn't lose you." He begged, he confessed, he tried to use love as his last-ditch defense. But Sophia's heart had been flash-frozen by the truth. She remembered Ethan's eyes at the gala, so cold, so mocking. He had known everything. For 7 years, she had been living in a lie, sleeping next to the man who had orchestrated her fiancé's murder. A wave of nausea and terror washed over her. "Let go of me. You're a monster." She kicked him away with all her strength. Marcus sprawled on the floor. In an instant, the pathetic, pleading man vanished, replaced by a cornered rat, rabid with fury. He scrambled to his feet, his face twisted into an ugly snarl. "Yeah, I did it. So what? Everything you have, I gave to you. You'd be nothing without me. That loser Ethan, what did he ever do to deserve it all? He deserved to die, and you come crying me now? Don't forget, Sophia, every penny you've spent for the last 7 years is stained with his blood." His words were poison-tipped daggers, each one finding its mark in Sophia's heart. He had completely lost control, a beast backed into a corner. He lunged, grabbing a handful of her hair and throwing her to the ground. "You think you're so pure? You were more than happy to spread your legs for me. Don't you dare act like a saint now." As Sophia hit the cold floor, she looked up at the raging madman and finally saw him for what he truly was. Her heart filled with nothing but disgust and fear. In my apartment, I calmly closed the laptop, shutting off the live feed. I had no interest in watching the rest of their pathetic drama unfold. Sophia's pain was the price she paid for 7 years of willful ignorance and comfortable complicity. Marcus's downfall was just the appetizer in the banquet of suffering I had prepared for him. My phone buzzed. A text from Rick. "Boss, some of Marcus's top execs are trying to liquidate assets. Looks like they're getting ready to run." A cold smile spread across my face. Run? 7 years ago, I didn't have a choice. This time, I'm writing the script. The scandal surrounding Marcus's company snowballed, growing more monstrous by the hour. The SEC, the FBI, the media, they all descended at once. The company's assets were frozen. His executives scattered like rats from a sinking ship. The ones who were too slow were taken into federal custody. Marcus was utterly alone, a king with no kingdom, surrounded on all sides. He barricaded himself in his penthouse, the monument to his stolen success, now his prison, and waited for the end. I had Rick hire a few people to spread some rumors in the high-stakes poker rooms and exclusive clubs Marcus used to frequent. You hear about Marcus Thorne at Nexus? Owes the Vegas mob millions. The company's bust. He's planning to skip the country. The news spread like wildfire. The investors he had ruined, along with some actual loan sharks, smelled blood in the water. Soon, a mob formed outside his luxury apartment building. Thorne, pay us back. Fraud, give me back my life savings. Angry shouts echoed in the street. Some started shaking the building's heavy glass doors, while others threw rocks at the penthouse windows. Marcus watched from behind his curtains, staring down at the swarm of furious faces, and finally snapped. He stumbled to his bar, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and started chugging it straight from the bottle, his eyes wild with terror. I watched it all through a pair of binoculars from a car parked down the street. His desperation, his fear, it was a mirror of the despair he had inflicted on so many others. This was karma. The official investigation was the final nail in his coffin. He tried to call his old contacts, tried to bribe his way out, but his calls went unanswered. The people who once bowed and scraped before him now treated him like a leper. Through an informant I had cultivated within law enforcement, I learned Marcus's next move. He was going to make a run for it, contacting a coyote to get him out of the country. The irony made my smile even colder. It was a familiar script. He'd use it to get rid of me. Did he really think I'd let him use the same exit? I took out a burner phone and dialed a number that was seared into my memory. After several rings, Marcus picked up, his voice a ragged, drunken gasp. "Who is this?" I said nothing. I just held the phone on my lips and breathed, a soft, rhythmic pattern. It was the code we use in the compound cells at night, just to let the man next to you know you were still alive. The breathing on the other end of the line stopped dead. I could picture his face, the expression of a man seeing something far worse than a ghost. Thinking of running, I finally said. My voice was calm, flat, but it carried the chilling echo of a tomb. 7 years in that hellhole. I learned a thing or two about crossing borders. Did you really think you could escape me? Clatter. The sound of his phone hitting the floor came through loud and clear. Marcus Thorne finally knew, with 100% certainty, that Ethan Hayes was back, and I was here to collect his soul. My call shattered the last of Marcus's sanity. After a moment of dead silence, he erupted with the feral rage of a trapped animal. He knew he was finished. His only option was to go scorched earth. He used the last of his connections and liquid cash to hire a crew of violent thugs off the street. His target was Sophia. He planned to kidnap her and use her as a bargaining chip to force me out into the open. How pathetic. He still thought he was playing a game of chess, not realizing I owned the entire board. I had anticipated this move. I'd had Rick and his guys shadowing Sophia 24/7, providing discreet protection. After the confrontation, she had moved back in with her parents, terrified and broken. Marcus's hired goons had just finished casing her parents' suburban neighborhood when Rick's crew, a few of the guys who'd made it out of the compound with us, descended on them. It was over in less than 5 minutes, swift and silent. Rick's men dragged the unconscious thugs in front of Sophia. She looked at the menacing figures and turned pale with fright. Rick stepped forward and handed her a phone playing the security footage of the takedown. "Ms. Wallace, Marcus sent these men for you. Ethan asked me to tell you that you're safe now." Sophia stared at Rick and the grim-faced man behind him. Hearing him refer to Ethan as his boss, she began to grasp, just for a moment, the kind of hell he must have endured for 7 years. Her heart was a toxic mix of guilt, fear, and a strange, unnameable relief. At the same time, I sent an anonymous tip to the police, complete with evidence of Marcus's murder-for-hire plot. The police moved in quickly, arresting the thugs Rick had released back into the wild at their designated meeting point. They were caught red-handed, hiding in his penthouse. Marcus soon got the news. The plan had failed. His men were in custody. In a fit of impotent rage, he destroyed everything he could get his hands on. He knew his last lifeline was gone. In utter despair, he went to his nightstand, opened a hidden compartment, and pulled out a handgun he'd kept for emergencies. He pressed the cold muzzle to his temple. He would rather die than fall into my hands. He closed his eyes, his finger tightening on the trigger. Click! An empty, hollow sound. The gun was unloaded. His eyes flew open in terror. The door to his bedroom, which he had locked and bolted, was ajar. I was leaning against the doorframe, casually tossing a fully loaded magazine in my hand. The brass-cased bullets glinted in the lamplight. Thinking of checking out, I asked, my voice dripping with contempt as I walked into the room. It's not going to be that easy. My stare was ice. I spoke to him in the slang of the compound, using the most demeaning term for a useless mark. A fish who can't even save his own skin thinks he can control another man's destiny. I advanced on him, and he scrambled backward until his back hit the cold wall. There was nowhere left to run. How'd you get in? He stammered, his face ashen. I was here when you were on the phone with those degenerates, I said, standing over him as he collapsed to the floor. And by the way, the coyote you called the muscle you hired, they all work for me. For 7 years, while you were living it up, I was building my own network in hell. Marcus finally broke. Every move he made, every desperate gamble, had been part of my design. He was a fly caught in a spider's web, and his struggles only served to entangle him further. I didn't lay a finger on him. I just took out my phone and played one last recording. It was from a dinner 7 years ago, before I disappeared. Marcus, drunk and arrogant, bragging to a mutual friend about his perfect plan. Once Ethan is gone, Sophia will be mine for the taking. I'll absorb his company's assets. He's such an idiot. He really thinks I'm his brother. The sound of his own triumphant laughter filled the room, a mocking, damning echo of the past. Listening to it, Marcus's face went from white to green to a lifeless gray. He was an empty shell, his soul scooped out. He had lost, utterly and completely. 08 The police surrounded the building soon after. I had anonymously handed over all the evidence, including the final, damning recording. I also included a few video files I had secretly recorded in the compound. Not enough to directly link Marcus to their operations, but enough to prove he had sent me to a place that was unequivocally a living hell. When the police led Marcus out of the building, he was catatonic, a walking corpse. I had Rick post the video of his arrest online with a simple caption, "What goes around comes around." The video went viral, creating a media firestorm. The 7-year-old cold case was blown wide open. The public was horrified by Marcus's treachery and fascinated by me, the man who had seemingly returned from the dead. A few days later, I agreed to meet Sophia at a quiet tea house. She looked worn out, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in years. Her bags were packed. She was leaving the city that held nothing but beautiful lies and ugly truths. "Ethan, I'm so..." She tried to apologize, but I cut her off. "You don't have to apologize to me," I said, my voice flat. My gaze held no love, no hate, only the stillness of a dead sea. The person you were 7 years ago might have been innocent, but the person you were for the last 7 years. Your complicity makes it impossible to go back. For 7 years, she had lived in my house, enjoying a life of luxury bought with money soaked in my blood and suffering. She may not have known the details, but her willful ignorance was not an excuse. "I didn't come back for you," I told her. "I just wanted you to see the real face of the man sleeping next to you." I had loved her once, fiercely and completely, but that love, along with my innocence, had been burned to ash in the fires of the last 7 years. I stood up to leave. "Ethan," she called out behind me. I paused but didn't turn around. "Your left hand. Is it okay?" Her voice was choked with tears. Years ago, I had stepped in to protect her from some street thugs. A knife had sliced the tendons in my left hand. Even after surgery, it had never fully healed, leaving it weak. It was one of the reasons Marcus was so sure I'd never survive the compound. I remained silent for a moment, then walked away without answering. She watched my back, and I knew she was crying. She knew she had lost me forever. In the interrogation room, faced with a mountain of evidence, Marcus Thorne confessed to everything. He detailed how he had plotted against me 7 years ago, and he laid out his ongoing connections with the cartel to cover his tracks. I saw the news of his official indictment on TV and felt nothing. My revenge was never about a momentary thrill of victory. It was about the complete and total annihilation of his entire world. Rick found me later. "What now, boss?" I looked out the window of my cheap apartment at the gray city sky. "The law will punish his body," I said, "but his soul belongs to me, and I'm sending it to a hell far deeper than any prison. Marcus's case, due to its connection to transnational organized crime and the massive public outcry, was fast-tracked. He was found guilty on multiple counts, including conspiracy to commit kidnapping, wire fraud, and racketeering. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in a federal penitentiary, and all of his illegally obtained assets were seized. The former titan of industry was now just another inmate. Through a contact in the prison system, I obtained a few photos of Marcus from inside. He was wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, his head shaved, his once confident face now hollow and haunted. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a vacant stare. I had Rick mail one of the photos to Marcus in prison. Inside the envelope was an anonymous note with a single sentence: "Your living is my guarantee of your suffering." I heard later that when Marcus received the letter, he had a complete psychotic break. He started screaming my name, smashing his head against the concrete walls of his cell until the guards had to restrain him and transfer him to the psychiatric wing. Death would have been a release for him. I needed him alive. I wanted him to spend every day for the next 2 decades rotting in that cell, haunted by the ghost of the life he stole and the ever-present shadow of my vengeance. I wanted him to live inside the nightmare of my cold eyes, the memory of the compound screams, and the slow-motion replay of how I tore his world apart, piece by piece. That was a punishment far more fitting than death. The penthouse, once a symbol of his stolen glory, was seized and auctioned off by the U.S. Marshals. The proceeds went toward compensating the investors he had defrauded. I didn't ask for a dime. Everything he had touched was tainted. I went back to the small apartment I'd been renting before I disappeared. The elderly landlady recognized me. Her eyes filled with tears. She had always assumed the worst, but had kept the apartment for me out of a stubborn sense of hope. Everything was as I had left it, covered in a thick layer of dust. I walked to the desk and picked up a picture frame. It was a faded photo of the three of us. A younger, smiling me, Sophia leaning against my shoulder, radiating happiness, and Marcus on my other side, his arms slung around me, his grin just as wide and seemingly genuine. We had been best friends, brothers. I looked at his lying face in the photo, and my fingers tightened. Crack! A fissure spiderwebbed across the glass. I pulled the photo from the frame, and without a moment's hesitation, I ripped it into tiny pieces and let them flutter into the trash can. 7 years. Everything had changed. The naive young man named Ethan Hayes died on a dark road 7 years ago. 10 Marcus's case was a loose thread that, when pulled, unraveled a much larger criminal conspiracy. My work wasn't done. My revenge was never about just one man. I reached out to the lead FBI agent on the case, identifying myself as a survivor of a cartel trafficking ring. I gave him more, much more. I gave him a list of names. The names that corresponded to the cold, hard numbers tattooed on my arm. I told the agent everything I knew about them, what they had been forced to do in the compound, and the entire operational structure of the cartel scam network as I understood it. Using my intelligence, the FBI launched a joint task force with international partners. They called it Operation Broadsword. It was a staggering success. The massive cross-border criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for years was dismantled. Hundreds of victims, people just like me who had been lured, trapped, and brutalized, were rescued. I compiled all the data I had, logbooks, transaction records, names, and sent it anonymously to several major news organizations. Soon, in-depth reports on the horrors of these scam compounds began to dominate the news cycle. For the first time, the public became aware of the forgotten victims languishing in the darkest corners of the world. People began to demand action, to call for better support systems for survivors. Using the last of my savings, I established a special fund through a national charity, remaining anonymous. Its sole purpose was to provide psychological counseling and financial aid to help survivors rebuild their lives. Rick saw a news report showing the rescued victims tearfully reuniting with their families. He called me, and this tough-as-nails man, nearly 30 years old, was sobbing like a child. "Ethan, thank you," he choked out. "Thank you for what you did. For us. For all the brothers who didn't make it back." I stood at my window, watching the first light of dawn break over the city, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in 7 years. My revenge was never just for me. It was for the living and for the dead, for every soul devoured by that evil place. The tattoo on my arm no longer felt like a brand of hate. It was a memorial, a responsibility. 11 after the storm passed, I turned down every interview request and rejected every offer of aid or award. I had no desire to be a hero. I was just a survivor who had crawled out of hell to finish a job. I sold my parents' old house. It was full of too many happy memories from a life that no longer belonged to me. With the money, I rented a small storefront in a quiet part of the city. I opened a coffee shop. I called it 7 years. The decor was sparse. On the main wall hung a single abstract painting I had done myself. A canvas of dark, muted colors, with the faint outlines of figures bound by invisible chains, struggling, screaming in silence. I traded my suits for simple, comfortable clothes. My days found a new rhythm, brewing coffee, reading books, living in the quiet hum of the city. My eyes were still deep, but the cold, sharp edge was gone, replaced by the quiet gravity of a man who had seen the worst of the world and survived. One autumn afternoon, Sophia was passing by, pulling a suitcase. She had been taking one last walk through her old neighborhood before leaving the city for good. When she saw the name of the shop, and then saw me behind the counter wiping down a cup, she froze. I looked up, and our eyes met through the plate glass window. Hers were a swirling storm of guilt, regret, and a dozen other emotions I couldn't name. I simply gave her a slight nod. There was no anger, no pain. It was the polite, distant acknowledgement one gives a stranger. She didn't come inside. She knew the chasm between us wasn't just 7 years of time, but a sea of blood and betrayal that could never be crossed. She gave me a deep, formal bow from the sidewalk, then turned and walked away without looking back, dragging her suitcase toward her own new life of atonement. Rick became a regular. He'd left his old life completely behind. With a small loan from me, he'd gone to trade school and was now a certified mechanic. He would often stop by after work for a coffee and tell me stories of the other survivors, how the fund was helping them get back on their feet and piece their lives back together. The tattoo was still there on my left arm, a permanent jagged scar. But I could look at it now without the all-consuming rage. The memory of that hell was a part of me, fused to my very being. It was no longer just a source of pain, but a constant reminder of what it truly means to be alive. In the front of a new journal, I wrote a single line. I was a monster forged in hell. Now, I will be the one who stands watch for the dawn. The 7 years coffee shop slowly gained a quiet reputation, not just for the quality of its coffee, but for its owner, a man who radiated a unique, weathered calm. Through word of mouth, other survivors of similar ordeals found their way to my shop. It became an unofficial sanctuary for them, a place where they could lower their defenses, speak of their trauma, and be understood without judgment. I became their listener, their confidant. I shared my own story to show them that life could be restarted, that pain could be overcome, as long as they didn't give up hope. I no longer hid a tattoo on my arm. When new customers asked about it, I would calmly tell them the stories behind the numbers, stories of real people, of the terrible price they paid just for the chance to live. As for Marcus, his condition in prison deteriorated. He was eventually diagnosed with severe schizophrenia and transferred to a high-security psychiatric facility. The reports I received said he spent his days and nights screaming my name, lost in a world of hallucinations, trapped forever in a nightmare of his own making, the personal, unending hell I had built for him. The penthouse was sold to a new owner, but the story of the building and its former resident became a dark legend in the city, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. One bright afternoon, I stood by the large window of my coffee shop, watching the endless flow of people and traffic outside. The warm sun fell on my left arm, making the black ink of the numbers stand out against my skin. I reached over with my right hand and gently traced the tattoo that had become a part of me. The faces of the men who had died, my brothers in suffering, flashed through my mind. I could almost hear them whispering to me, not with cries for vengeance, but with a quiet acknowledgement that justice had been served, and with an urging to embrace the new life I had found. I took a deep breath, and a profound sense of peace and release settled over me. The 7 years in hell had forged me. But every day from now on would be my own. I was no longer the demon bent on revenge. I was a man covered in scars who had chosen to walk toward the light. I was finally Ethan Hayes,